Imagine an industry so controlled that flying from Paris to Rome cost more than a month's rent, and then, almost overnight, that entire system collapsed. Tiny upstarts, running on an insane business model, began tearing Europe's flag carriers apart. Within a decade, a weekend flight cost less than dinner and air travel stopped being a luxury. It became a habit. But how did a handful of budget airlines break the most regulated industry in Europe? Why did the very rules meant to protect national carriers end up destroying them? And what vanished when flying stopped feeling special? The evidence of this takeover is no longer subtle. Look at the data from 2024. The numbers show low-cost carriers, or LCCs, far outpacing legacy airlines in the launch of new routes. The rankings for new route announcements are an ocean of orange, blue and pink. The top launchers, Ryanair, EasyJet, Wizz Air, Norwegian and Jet2, dominate the lists, connecting cities that were never previously linked. By contrast, the expansion from Lufthansa, Air France-KLM and British Airways parent IAG is comparatively tiny. This isn't just a minor trend, it's a profound strategic shift. The legacy carriers, the old flag carriers that once defined European aviation, have largely ceded the entire short-haul volume market to their low-cost rivals. They aren't even trying to compete on these routes anymore. They've retreated and the budget carriers have claimed the territory. But how did they build this dominance so quickly and so completely? It wasn't just about cheap tickets. It started with a revolutionary idea about where to fly. While the legacy giants were locked in a death match for expensive, congested slots at primary hubs like Heathrow, Charles de Gaulle and Frankfurt, the budget pioneers saw an opportunity where no one else was looking: the secondary airports. These were the forgotten airfields, the old military bases, the regional strips an hour or more outside the main city. Think London Stansted instead of Heathrow, Bergamo instead of Milan Malpensa, or Girona instead of Barcelona El Prat. To the legacy carriers, these airports were worthless, too small, too remote, and lacking the premium infrastructure for their business class lounges. To the low-cost carriers, they were a goldmine. These secondary airports offered three things that formed the bedrock of the low-cost model. First, phenomenally low landing fees. The airport operators, desperate for any traffic, would often pay the airlines to fly there, not the other way around. Second, no congestion. This meant no time wasted circling in holding patterns, no long taxis to the runway. Third, and most critically, this lack of congestion enabled the single most important metric in budget aviation: the quick turnaround. At a major hub, a legacy carrier's plane might sit on the ground for 90 minutes or more, being cleaned, refueled, and recatered. At Bergamo, a Ryanair crew could deplane, clean, refuel, and board an entire new plane load of passengers in just 25 minutes. That speed wasn't just efficiency, it was a fundamental economic weapon. A plane on the ground is a depreciating asset, a money pit. A plane in the air is a revenue-generating machine. By slashing ground time, low-cost carriers could squeeze 2 or 3 extra flights out of a single aircraft every single day. They effectively built a parallel private network of airports across Europe, a network their rivals couldn't access and didn't understand until it was far too late. But it wasn't just where they flew, it was what they flew, and this is where the genius of the model becomes terrifyingly clear. Walk through a legacy carrier's maintenance hangar, and you'll see a dizzying array of aircraft types. They operate wide-body jets for long-haul routes, various narrow-body models for short-haul, and smaller regional jets for thin routes. This requires multiple different pools of pilots, all with different certifications. It requires cabin crews trained on different safety procedures, and most expensive of all, it requires a vast and complex inventory of spare parts for every different engine, winglet, and landing gear. Now, look at the budget carriers. Ryanair's mainline fleet flies only the Boeing 737. EasyJet flies only the Airbus A320 family. This single-type fleet strategy is another core secret to their dominance. The economic advantages are staggering. Maintenance is radically simplified. Mechanics become experts on one airframe, and the airline only needs to stockpile parts for that single model. Training costs plummet. A pilot can fly any plane in the entire fleet, making scheduling infinitely more flexible. This operational simplicity allows for that high aircraft utilization, those quick turns. The planes fly more hours per day, generating more revenue per aircraft, which in turn allows the airline to spread its fixed costs over a much larger base. They pair this with a relentless focus on new aircraft. A newer fleet means better fuel efficiency, which is the single biggest variable cost for any airline. It also means higher reliability, with fewer delays and cancellations from technical faults. While legacy carriers were flying aging, mixed, and inefficient fleets, the low-cost carriers were running a fleet of brand new, identical, high-utilization, fuel-sipping jets. It was a factory model, and the legacy carriers, with their bespoke, complicated operations, stood no chance. But here's the part of the story that is most often missed. Budget carriers didn't just steal passengers from the legacy airlines. If they had, the market would be a fraction of its current size. The true revolution, the secret that powered their explosive growth, is that they created an entirely new market. They expanded the pie before they even bothered to fight for the scraps. Before the European Union deregulated its aviation market in the 1990s, air travel was a luxury. It was heavily regulated, fares were kept artificially high by state-owned flag carriers, and the average person rarely, if ever, flew. Deregulation blew the doors off this cozy cartel, and the budget carriers stormed in. With their hyper-efficient model, they could offer fares so low, 10 euros, 5 euros, even 1 euro, that they fundamentally changed the public's psychology. Flying was no longer a major life event. It was an impulse purchase. The weekend city break was already a niche for the wealthy, but Ryanair and EasyJet turned it into a mass-market habit. They made air travel a commodity, and in doing so, unleashed decades of explosive passenger growth. They built this new market, but to service it profitably at those price points, they had to build an entirely new kind of workforce. And this is where the model shows its ruthless side. The final pillar of the budget airline advantage is its low-cost labor model. While legacy carriers like Lufthansa and Air France were, and still are, bound by powerful, long-standing union agreements, high fixed pay scales, and generous pension commitments, the LCCS started with a blank slate. They built leaner labor structures from the ground up. This often involved using contract crews instead of direct employees, especially for cabin crew. It meant flexible scheduling that maximized flying hours and basing aircraft and crews in countries with lower labor costs or more favorable tax regulations. This relentless focus on labor flexibility and cost control created a massive structural cost advantage that legacy carriers simply could not match without triggering crippling strikes. It's a source of constant tension, as seen in the high-profile pilot strikes in 2018 and 2019, but it remains a non-negotiable part of the economic engine that allows a 10 euro ticket to exist. This combination of secondary airports, single-type fleets, market creation, and low-cost labor made the budget carriers formidable. But then, a global crisis hit that should have leveled the playing field. Instead, it cemented their victory. When the COVID-19 pandemic grounded global aviation in 2020, the legacy carriers, with their high fixed costs and reliance on premium long-haul business travel, collapsed. They survived only because of massive state bailouts, billions upon billions in taxpayer money from the German, French, and other governments. The LCCS, on the other hand, played it completely differently. With stronger balance sheets and lower cash burn rate, they avoided direct equity bailouts but still tapped government-backed loans to stay liquid. And while the legacy carriers were furloughing staff and putting their fleets into deep storage, Ryanair did the unthinkable. It placed one of the largest aircraft orders in history, betting that the recovery would come fast. They were right. By 2024, Ryanair and its peers were operating at capacity above 2019 levels. Many major legacy carriers were still below their pre-pandemic passenger counts. The crisis acted as a great accelerator. It wounded the legacy carriers, perhaps fatally, while the budget carriers used the downturn to double down, emerging stronger with more market share and a fleet of brand new planes. This post-pandemic dominance gave them another unexpected advantage. As regulators turned up the heat on climate change, the budget carriers found themselves holding all the best cards. The European Union is getting serious about aviation emissions, with new rules like the Emissions Trading Scheme and the Refuel EU mandate for sustainable aviation fuels, or SAF. These regulations punish inefficiency. On the surface, budget flying seems like a dirty business, but the metric that matters to regulators is emissions per passenger, and on that metric, the low-cost carriers win. Their fleets are, on average, far younger than their legacy rivals. Their planes are configured with more seats, flying at much higher load factors. A full Ryanair flight is far more efficient per person than a half-empty legacy flight. As the cost of carbon rises, the low-cost carriers' modern, efficient fleets give them yet another cost advantage. The environmental regulations designed to clean up the industry are, paradoxically, hitting the old legacy carriers the hardest. Faced with this unwinnable multi-front war, the legacy carriers have done the only thing they can. They've retreated. The battle for the short-haul, intra-European leisure market is over. The flag carriers have quietly conceded. Their new strategy is to focus their mainline brands, Lufthansa, British Airways, Air France, almost exclusively on what they still do best, high-margin, long-haul international routes and the premium business travelers who use their hubs. To handle what remains of the mass market short-haul battle, they've created their own low-cost subsidiaries. IAG has Vueling, Air France KLM has Transavia, and Lufthansa has Eurowings. But these are not offensive weapons, they are defensive shields, attempts to stop the bleeding. In many ways, they are a quiet admission of defeat. The main brands have surrendered the volume game in their own backyard. But the war isn't over. The low-cost carriers have conquered Europe, and now they are looking at the last, most profitable stronghold of the legacy model, the long-haul market. This is the final frontier. It's been tried before. Norwegian Air infamously attempted a low-cost, long-haul model from 2013 using Boeing 787 Dreamliners, but after years of financial strain, it collapsed into restructuring in 2020 and ended long-haul operations in 2021. The economics were just too difficult to crack, but the idea is not dead. New challengers like Norse Atlantic Airways are testing refined models. The real game changer, however, isn't a new airline, it's a new airplane. The introduction of hyper-efficient, long-range narrow-body jets like the Airbus A321XLR and new 737 MAX variants could finally make low-cost transatlantic flights sustainable. These planes have the range to cross the Atlantic but the economics of a short-haul jet. If the budget carriers can crack the code for long-haul, it will threaten the very last, most profitable refuge of the legacy carrier model. If they crack this, the entire model of global aviation breaks. But the biggest change may have already happened. It's not in the sky, it's in our heads. In a single generation, the budget airlines have changed the entire psychology of flying. What was once a luxury, a prestigious experience associated with the glamour of a flag carrier, is now a utility. It's a commodity, like a bus ride or a train journey. Older travelers may remember the prestige, but younger generations optimize purely for price and convenience. Even corporate travel departments, once the exclusive domain of legacy carriers, now routinely book their employees on budget airlines for short trips to control costs. Flying within Europe is now a transactional purchase, not a status experience. The glamour is gone, and it's never coming back. Is this the final model for aviation, a ruthless, efficient utility? Or is it a race to the bottom that will ultimately collapse under its own weight? The battle for Europe's skies is over. The battle for the Atlantic is just beginning, and it threatens to rewrite the rules of global travel forever. One thing is certain, the era of the grand flag carrier is ending, but what replaces it might be something we never asked for. Click here to check out another one of our videos.